Hey everyone, it's Steph, and today I'm here with a video to talk about my 10 sewing essential tools. I will list off my 10 essential tools, and then I will go through one of them one by one to tell you a little bit more about them in detail. On my list, I have a dedicated pair of fabric scissors, pins and or clips, a pin cushion or otherwise a magnet, sewing chalk or a sewing pen, sewing tape measure, a ruler, a seam ripper, bobbins, and spare needles. So starting with the first one, a dedicated pair of fabric scissors. These are mine. So it's really important to have a specifically dedicated pair of fabric scissors because fabric scissors optimally should be super duper sharp. So you want to have a pair of scissors that cut nothing but fabric, because if you use the pair of scissors on anything but fabric, they will dull very quickly, which means it'll be much harder for you to cut through fabric. Some people use a rotary blade, which kind of reminds me of a pizza cutter. I've really used them, but I don't think that they're very useful. But again, I don't use them, so I don't know. If that's something you're interested in, I highly recommend checking it out. I will have a link for one in the description, but I know that those can be very useful too, especially because while you're cutting, these can kind of hurt your wrists a little bit. Second on the list are pins or clips. So these are what mine look like. I have both. I honestly think it's useful to have both, so I'll be counting them as separate items, but talking about them simultaneously. Pins can be really useful because these will directly pretty much staple your fabrics together, more or less. I like to have a lot, so they're all over my pin cushion. You can get varying sizes, but most of mine tend to be fairly long. I know that they do sell shorter ones. It's a little bit hard to see here because it is a thin piece of metal, but this is approximately how long my pins are. I believe there are different types of pins for different types of fabrics, but I just sort of use this one kind. For clips or wonder clips, I have mine in this nifty little cup right here. These are much better for delicate fabrics or if you're using fabrics that don't self-heal. And when I talk about self-healing, I'm talking about fabrics like vinyl that would scar after you push a pin through them, so that when you take the needle out, you'll see the little dot where the needle was before. These are a really great alternative to that because they won't leave any marks. Additionally, sometimes pins can slip out of clothing, so that's where wonder clips can come in. The next item that I think is essential is a pin cushion, which is where I keep all my pins in. I think it's super nifty to have a pin cushion. There are variations of pin cushions aside from the standard tomato, such as a tomato for your wrist, or there is a magnet bowl that I've seen floating around. Those are really nice because if you drop your pin, you could just wave the magnet bowl over where you think your pin is, and then you can pick it up without worrying about potentially stepping on it. Next on the list is my marking tool of choice, which would be sewing chalk or a sewing pen. These are my squares of sewing chalk that I use. They're the pretty standard kind that you can find at Joann's. I know that they have other colors online as well, but blue and white pretty much get the job done for me. Sewing chalk also comes in a pencil form, but the benefit of it is that it rubs off over time, or you can rub it off with water. The downside to it is that if you're working with something like a knit or a slippery fabric, it can be kind of hard to mark at times. They work best on fabrics like cotton. For other types of fabric, it could be a little bit better to use something like a fabric pen. This is what my fabric pen looks like. I ordered it off of Amazon. I'll have a link in the description. It's water soluble, which means that if you put water on it, it'll disappear, so that's really nice. The only downside is that it doesn't really show up on dark fabrics, so something to keep in mind. I will hunt around for an alternative and put it in the description if I find any. These are really important for tracing around the patterns in order for you to cut them out. Pins and clips are very useful to have because they allow you to hold your fabric together if you have something folded in half, or if you need to cut a duplicate of a shape that you're cutting out. This is something that you do fairly often in sewing with things such as sleeves or pants. Next up on the list is a sewing tape measure. That's what these little dudes are. They come in a lot of different colors, but they all pretty much look like this. They're pretty much just flexible rulers. The point of these are to help you measure parts of your body, obviously, so if you need a measurement from shoulder to shoulder, or if you need to measure around your arm or something, these guys will help you get the job done. Next on the list, and probably my favorite tool in my entire sewing arsenal, I recommend a ruler. These are really useful, especially if you're like me and you draft your own patterns, but they help you calculate everything. I specifically use this flexible, transparent ruler, but this helps a lot with calculating my seam allowances and stuff like that. It is 18 inches long and 2 inches wide. You can see it has markings for the ½ inch here, so it's super easy to calculate the seam allowance, and then it has also every 1/4 of an inch in each of these squares. And then if you need eighths, if you look at the side right here, they calculate eighths for you right here too. So I find this to be a very multi-purpose ruler. Next on the list is a seam ripper, which is what this little guy is. This is what the tip of a seam ripper looks like. This one is a little bit longer, which is more ergonomic. I believe most seam rippers that come with sewing machines tend to be a lot smaller. I recommend getting ones with a longer handle like this because it's much easier on your hand. Seam rippers are really useful for if you're sewing and you make a mistake, especially if you're sewing things together that you don't mean to be, which I did a lot when I was starting out with sewing. These little guys will help you very much because they will tear through any stitches that you have made. Also, fun fact about using these seam rippers is that the proper way of using a seam ripper is to insert the bottom portion right here where this red ball is underneath the stitch, because right here in this little dip here is where the seams get torn. So you would typically run your seam ripper through the stitches that way. Sometimes I don't trust a seam ripper, and it might be because it's not so sharp, because it can tear your fabric, so just be careful about that. The slower method is to dig with the longer part underneath the stitches and undo them bit by bit. Next on the list that I recommend are bobbins. So bobbins are the little plastic or metal, depending on your preference, cases that hold the bit of thread in your machine. Because I have a fairly extensive collection of thread, my bobbin collection in turn is fairly extensive. So I have my own homemade bobbin holder that looks like this. I just purchased a case from Joann's that is similar to my thread case, and using our laser cutter, we had cut rectangles out of EVA foam because honestly, when I was looking at a lot of the bobbin cases, that was pretty much how they were designed anyways, so I just made myself this super deluxe extra large one. But it's a good idea to have extra bobbins, at least in my opinion, because I like to have sets of bobbins and thread that I can switch out whenever I need a particular color. It's somewhat a pet peeve of mine to stack multiple colors on one bobbin. I think it's better and more efficient when you're working to have different bobbins for different colors, and down here you can see I have all of these spare bobbins for if I work with a different color. Additionally, if there's a color you work with a lot, I think it's also useful to have a couple bobbins for it. I have 3 white ones up here. It's a little excessive. I think it's better to have 2, but I think it's very useful because if you're sewing with that color a lot and you for some reason are lazy and don't want to re-spool one, you'll have a second backup just in case. Last but certainly not least on my list are spare needles. I talked about this in another video, but I think it's really important to have a lot of spare needles laying around for your machine. Not only is that better for your machine upkeep to have spares in case your needle gets dull, but in case your needle snaps, it's always good to have a substitute laying around. I have all of these spare needle kits that I keep in my machine. They are also needles for different purposes. This one, for example, is ballpoint for when I work with knits. These ones are the more heavy-duty ones. I have a huge collection of regular universal needles because I use that the most, as you can see here. And that is that for my 10 essential sewing tools. If you're completely new to sewing and you aren't really sure what to get, hopefully this list helps you have an idea. I will have a list in the description of all of these items that I use. If you don't use some of these items, hopefully you'll see the use in having some of them. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any other tools that you find particularly useful. There are many tools in the world of sewing that I didn't mention here, such as templates, curves, a sewing gauge I believe is the name of one of them, but I'm curious to know what you think is super useful and essential in your kit. If there's anything that was unclear, if you have any other questions, comments, let me know in the comments down below. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video or if you agree with the items on my list. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.